The Appalachian Trail has many dangers: steep cliffs, sudden storms, wild animals lurking in the dark. But hikers who know the old stories will tell you, none of these compare to the terror of the Goatman. Legends describe him as something caught between two worlds, half human, half goat. A tall, twisted figure with horns curling from his skull, glowing eyes that burn in the night, and hooved feet that echo across the forest floor. Some say he walks upright, stalking his prey like a man. Others swear he moves more like a beast, darting through the trees faster than any human should be able to run. The Goatman is not just a story told to scare children. Over the decades, hikers, campers, and even locals who live along the Appalachian Mountains have reported chilling encounters with this creature. Some claim they've seen him standing in the shadows, watching from the tree line. Others describe the sounds, slow, heavy footsteps following them, or the rhythmic clop of hooves that seem to circle their campsites long after midnight. And then there are the disappearances, hikers who set out on the trail and never returned. Their belongings found scattered, claw marks etched into the trees, and no logical explanation for what happened to them. For some, the answer is simple: the Goatman took them. In this video, we're going to dive into the origins of the Goatman legend, explore the terrifying stories passed down through folklore, and relive true encounters from hikers who swear they came face to face with this nightmare. From missing persons reports to modern-day sightings on online forums, the legend is alive, and it is more horrifying than ever. So settle in, turn down the lights, and listen closely, because by the end of this video, you may never look at the woods the same way again. The legend of the Goatman did not begin on the Appalachian Trail. His story stretches back through decades of folklore, whispered in the towns and woodlands of the American South and East. One of the most infamous tales comes from Maryland in the 1970s. The so-called Maryland Goatman became a local terror around Prince George's County, particularly near Bowie. Reports described a large, horned creature with the body of a man and the legs of a goat. Farmers claimed to have seen it stalking their livestock. Teenagers reported being chased from wooded backroads late at night. And according to local legend, pets began to vanish. Dogs and even goats found mutilated near the edges of the forest. Some newspapers at the time even carried the story, treating it as part urban legend, part warning. One chilling article described the Goatman as a figure with the head of a beast and the rage of a man, known to swing an axe at passing cars or prowl near lovers' lanes. Whether these were exaggerations or based on terrified eyewitnesses, no one could ever prove. But the name stuck, and Maryland's Goatman became a permanent part of American folklore. Further south, in Kentucky, the creature took on another form. There, people spoke of the Pope Lick Monster, a terrifying half-man, half-goat said to live beneath a railroad trestle near Louisville. For decades, locals warned of a beast that lured curious teenagers onto the tracks, only for them to be struck by oncoming trains. In some stories, the Goatman called out in a voice that mimicked a loved one, drawing people closer. In others, he used hypnosis, locking victims in place as death approached. Though skeptics dismissed these accounts as urban legend, the danger was all too real. Many who went searching for the monster met their end not by the Goatman, but by the trains above. Still, the Pope Lick Monster endures as one of Kentucky's darkest myths. And yet, the Appalachian Mountains themselves have their own stories. Long before these modern encounters, native tribes in the region told tales of horned beings and spirit creatures that haunted the forests. Some spoke of twisted men cursed by the spirits of the woods. Others described horned guardians of sacred land, terrifying to look upon but deeply tied to the balance of nature. While the details shift, the theme remains the same. The image of a human form fused with the wild, something not entirely beast, not entirely man, but something caught between. Over time, these legends merged and spread. Hikers and locals began to report sightings not just in Maryland or Kentucky, but across the entire Appalachian region. It was as if the Goatman was no longer bound to one town or one bridge. Instead, the creature had taken on a life of its own, a nightmare that could appear anywhere the wilderness grew deep and dark. And when it comes to explanations, the theories are as chilling as the stories themselves. Some insist the Goatman is the result of a government experiment gone wrong. A creature born in a laboratory, escaped into the woods and left to hunt in silence. Others believe it is a man cursed by witchcraft or ancient ritual, doomed to walk the earth in a monstrous form for eternity. Still more whisper of darker roots, that the Goatman is no man at all, but a demonic entity tied to old sacrifices, a being summoned from the underworld to claim the souls of those foolish enough to wander into his territory. In a 1971 Washington Post article, one local described the Goatman in almost biblical terms, saying, "He is evil, pure evil. You don't go looking for him. If he wants you, he will find you." Over the years, sightings only multiplied. From Maryland to Kentucky, from old tribal lands to the farthest stretches of the Appalachian Trail, the legend has grown stronger, not weaker. With every passing decade, the Goatman moves deeper into the mountains, his story blending with the missing hikers, the strange sounds at night, the shadows that should not be there. And yet, sightings only grew. Moving deeper into the Appalachian Mountains, the Goatman legend has taken root in one of the most isolated, haunting landscapes in America. A place where even the bravest hikers admit something watches from the trees. Legends are frightening enough on paper, but they take on a darker weight when someone claims to have lived through them. One of the most chilling Goatman encounters comes from the early 1970s, around the same time reports first surged in Maryland. It is said that a hiker, traveling alone near the woods of Prince George's County, stumbled into something he was never meant to see. The story begins just before dusk. The man was walking a narrow path that cut through a patch of forest locals already considered strange. The trees there seemed older, twisted, their branches clawing into the sky. As the daylight began to fade, the forest grew quiet, eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals, just silence. The hiker would later say it felt as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. At first, he dismissed it as the ordinary stillness of evening. But then he heard it, a faint crack, like a heavy branch snapping underfoot, just beyond the treeline. He froze, waiting, listening. The sound came again, slow, deliberate, as though something or someone was pacing him just out of sight. He pressed on, quickening his pace, but the sounds followed. The crunch of leaves, the grinding of gravel, timed almost perfectly with his own footsteps. Then came the smell, a sharp, acrid stench, like sulfur or burning hair, carried on the evening breeze. It was so strong that it turned his stomach, and with it came a growing sense of dread, heavy and suffocating. When he finally dared to glance over his shoulder, he saw nothing. Only shadows stretched thin between the trees. But the feeling of being watched had become undeniable, like a pair of eyes boring into his back. He pulled out his flashlight, clicked it on, and swept the beam across the woods. For a heartbeat, everything seemed ordinary, until 2 points of red appeared in the darkness. They were eyes, glowing eyes, set high off the ground, staring directly at him from between the trees. He described them later as not the eyes of an animal, but something far more intelligent, something calculating. And when the beam of his flashlight caught them, the eyes did not flinch. They only blinked, slowly, as though the creature was unbothered, almost amused by his fear. Then came the sound of breathing, heavy, labored, but with an animalistic rasp. It rose from the darkness ahead of him, a guttural exhale that seemed to shake the leaves. His instincts screamed to run, but his body refused to move, locked in place by terror. Finally, with shaking hands, he adjusted the flashlight, lifting the beam just enough to see more than the eyes. And that is when he saw the silhouette. A tall figure, easily 7 feet in height, standing upright like a man but twisted, wrong. Broad shoulders hunched forward, long, muscular arms, and from the crown of its head, unmistakable horns curled back into the night. He said the creature shifted its weight, and with that movement came the distinct, chilling clop of hooves pressing into the soil. Not boots, not paws, hooves. The sound echoed through the trees like a hammer striking stone. For several seconds that stretched into eternity, the hiker and the Goatman stared at one another across the clearing. Then, without warning, The creature let out a low, guttural snarl, deep enough to rattle his chest. The man broke free of his paralysis and bolted down the path, his flashlight beam jerking wildly with each step. But the sound followed. Not close, but never far. The crunch of leaves, the clop of hooves, always just beyond the edge of his light. He ran until his lungs burned, until the sulfur stench thinned and the forest noise returned, until he dared to believe he had escaped. It wasn't until he reached the safety of the road that he finally stopped, chest heaving, hands trembling. He turned, lifted his flashlight one last time, and shined it back into the forest. The path behind him was empty, but from somewhere deep in the trees came the sound again, one slow, deliberate step, then another. He would later say, "When I turned back with my flashlight, the figure was gone. But the sound of hooves kept following me." The encounter ended there, unresolved, but it was enough to leave him shaken for the rest of his life. To him, there was no question, the Goatman was real, and it was hunting. The Goatman legend is not confined to a single place. Over time, his shadow has spread, stretching along the Appalachian Trail itself. A trail more than 2,000 miles long, weaving through dense forests, steep ridges, and endless miles of wilderness. For decades, hikers have whispered about encounters that sound unnervingly similar. The smell of sulfur, the sound of hooves, the feeling of being watched. One account comes from a group of campers who pitched their tents along a remote stretch of the trail in Virginia. They recalled the night beginning quietly enough. Firelight, distant crickets, the soft hum of wind in the trees. But sometime after midnight, the noises changed. First, they heard a single crunch of leaves, deliberate, measured. Then came the steady clop, clop, clop of hooves pressing into the earth. At first, they assumed it was deer moving through the brush. But the sound did not wander past. Instead, it circled them, step by step, around and around their tents. For nearly an hour, the group sat in silence, terrified to move, listening to the unseen figure pace just beyond the glow of their fire. When morning came, there were no tracks, no hoofprints in the soil. But the memory of those circling footsteps remained, burned into their minds forever. In another story, a hiker vanished along a section of the trail in West Virginia. Search parties combed the area for days before finding his pack and a scattering of belongings left behind near a tree. What unsettled rescuers most were the marks gouged into the bark above it. Long, jagged scratches, as though something with claws or horns had raked across the trunk. His body was never found. Officials attributed the disappearance to a simple accident, a fall perhaps, or disorientation. But locals had a different explanation. The Goatman had claimed another victim. And then there are the fleeting glimpses. Locals living near trailheads in Pennsylvania and North Carolina have told nearly identical stories. Late at night, when the roads are quiet and the moonlight cuts through the trees, they've seen a figure dart across the trail. Tall, hunched, with horns catching the light just before vanishing into the forest. Some say it moved on two legs unnaturally fast. Others insisted dropped to all fours the moment it reached the tree line. Always silent. Always gone before anyone could follow. Taken on their own, each story might be dismissed. An overactive imagination in the dark. The sounds of deer mistaken for hooves. A hiker's disappearance explained by nature's dangers. But together, these encounters begin to form a darker picture. It raises the question, is the Goatman moving through the Appalachian system itself? Could he be following the trail the same way hikers do, using its endless stretches of wilderness as his hunting ground? The Appalachian Trail is a place of beauty, yes, but it is also a place of isolation. Miles of forest where you can walk for hours without seeing another soul. And in that silence, many hikers report the same unsettling feeling, the sensation of being followed, as though something just beyond sight is matching their pace, step for step, waiting for them to falter. And perhaps that is the most terrifying part, because if you've ever hiked alone and felt the hairs on the back of your neck rise, if you've ever turned suddenly, certain that someone was watching from the shadows, maybe you weren't imagining it. Maybe you were not alone at all. Every legend has one story that stands above the rest. A tale told and retold until it becomes part of the place itself. For the Goatman, one of the most chilling comes from a group of hikers who claimed they had an encounter deep in the Appalachian backcountry. According to their account, the night began innocently enough. It was late summer, and 4 friends had set out to explore a remote section of the trail in North Carolina. They hiked most of the day and, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, they set up camp in a small clearing just off the path. The forest was still, the air heavy, and aside from the crackling of their fire, silence hung over the camp. At first, nothing seemed unusual. They shared stories, cooked a simple meal, and laughed under the stars. But sometime after midnight, the mood shifted. One of them noticed it first. A sound, faint, almost too quiet to notice at all. A twig snapping somewhere in the trees. Then another. At first, they dismissed it as deer or some other nocturnal animal. But soon the sounds grew heavier, more deliberate, like footsteps pacing just beyond the circle of light. The group grew uneasy. They stoked the fire higher, casting longer shadows into the forest. And that is when they heard it. Laughter. Low, distorted, like a human voice dragged through static. It didn't rise from their circle but from the darkness just outside it. Laughter that was not friendly, not human. Panic set in. The friends huddled close, whispering, trying to convince themselves it was only their imagination. But the noises did not stop. Around them, the woods seemed alive with motion. Branches creaked, underbrush shifted, and always, those deliberate footsteps circling the camp. Then, out of the corner of his eye, one hiker caught sight of it. A shadow between the trees, massive and hunched. He swore he saw horns catch the firelight for the briefest second, curving upward into the night sky. When he blinked, it was gone, as though the forest itself had swallowed it whole. The fear was suffocating now. One friend grabbed a flashlight, swept the beam through the trees, and froze. Just beyond the light's edge, crouched low among the branches, something was watching them. Its body was half concealed, but its eyes burned back red against the dark. For several seconds, no one moved. Then, in a blur of motion, the figure shifted, faster than anything they'd ever seen, gone before the beam could lock onto it. The group was on the verge of fleeing when the woods erupted. A roar shattered the silence. Deep, guttural, so loud it rattled their chests and shook the tents. It was followed by the tearing of canvas, as one of their tents was ripped open by something unseen. The friends scrambled, grabbing whatever they could, bolting down the trail in blind terror. Behind them, they swore they heard heavy steps pounding the earth, hooves hammering the ground as something gave chase. They didn't stop running until the trail opened near a ranger station miles away, where they collapsed in exhaustion. When questioned later, none of them could agree exactly on what they saw. Some swore it was a horned figure. Others believed it was a shape that changed as it moved, shifting between man and beast. But they all agreed on one thing. Something was out there that night and it wanted them gone. And that is the detail that makes this encounter so haunting. They could not prove it. They could not capture it. But 4 people on the same night, in the same place, walked away with memories they will never forget. Perhaps it was mass hysteria. Perhaps the woods played tricks on them. But if you ask the hikers themselves, their answer is simple. They believe they met the Goatman, and they will never step foot in those mountains again. When we speak of the Goatman, it's tempting to dismiss him as nothing more than a campfire monster, a local legend designed to keep hikers wary of the woods. But the truth is, stories of beings like him echo across cultures and centuries, and they rarely stay confined to one place. Take the skinwalkers of Navajo tradition. Described as shape-shifting beings capable of taking on the form of animals, they lurk on the edges of human settlements, using trickery and terror to prey on travelers. Many who claim to have seen the Goatman describe him as shifting between human and beast, never fully one or the other. Is it coincidence? Or are we seeing the same story under a different name? Then there is the Wendigo, rooted in Algonquian folklore of the northern forests. A cannibalistic spirit said to embody greed and hunger, The Wendigo is often depicted as gaunt, horned, and monstrous. It prowls the woods, calling out with eerie mimicry to lure victims. Some Appalachian sightings of Goatman include disturbing accounts of laughter or voices calling from the trees. Could it be that the Goatman is simply the southern shadow of the Wendigo myth? And of course, we cannot ignore the most famous of all, Bigfoot. The Appalachian Mountains are riddled with tales of enormous, hairy humanoids stepping out of the trees, leaving behind giant tracks in the mud. Unlike the Goatman, Bigfoot is often described as shy, elusive, and almost gentle. But what if these sightings are connected? What if the wilderness is home to not one, but many unexplained beings, their stories overlapping in the minds of those who witness them? Skeptics have long offered psychological explanations. The woods, they argue, are the perfect stage for fear. At night, without light, every sound feels amplified. The crunch of branches, the call of a distant animal, even the sway of shadows in the moonlight, all can trigger panic, paranoia, and hallucination. When people are already primed with legends of Goatman, Wendigo, or skinwalkers, the mind can turn ordinary rustles into monstrous presences. But here is the problem with that theory. Hallucinations do not leave claw marks on trees. They do not rip open tents. They do not leave behind the sound of hooves echoing in the night. So we are left with the unsettling possibility. Whether Goatman is a spirit, a cryptid, or something far stranger, the stories keep multiplying. And just like the legends of skinwalkers, Wendigos, and Bigfoot, they refuse to go away. If the Goatman is only imagination, why does he keep showing up in the dark woods of America? And if he isn't, then what exactly is stalking the Appalachian Trail? Legends of the Goatman are not locked away in dusty folklore books. They continue alive and unsettling in the age of the internet. On online forums and Reddit threads, hikers swap eerie stories late into the night. One post from 2020 describes a man trekking a lonely stretch of the Appalachian Trail. As dusk settled, he noticed a second set of footsteps behind him, heavy, deliberate, always matching his pace. When he stopped, the sound stopped. When he moved, it followed. Finally, in the fading light, he caught sight of a figure in the trees. Tall, broad, walking upright. But when it stepped onto the path, the hiker swore he saw hooves striking the dirt. Terrified, he ran, and for miles, the sound of those hooves never let up. He wasn't the only one. On hiking Facebook groups and local folklore pages, warnings still circulate. Some insist you should never camp near certain trailheads after dark. Others whisper of campers waking to the sound of snorting breath outside their tents, followed by claw-like scratches on tree trunks the next morning. In one chilling case, a backpacker posted that he and his friends set up camp near a remote ridge. At around 3 a.m., laughter echoed from the woods. Not quite human, but not entirely animal either. When they shined a flashlight, something huge darted between the trees. By dawn, they abandoned camp, too shaken to continue their hike. Even mainstream local news outlets occasionally mention disappearances on the Appalachian Trail. Most are written off as accidents, hikers who fell, got lost, or were caught by the elements. But among locals and in the shadowy corners of the internet, a different explanation is whispered. Goatman doesn't just watch. Sometimes he takes. Whether these stories are urban legend, internet creepypasta, or something more, they share the same unsettling pattern. An unseen presence that stalks, follows, and terrifies hikers in the Appalachian wilderness. And that brings us to the most chilling truth of all. These are not just stories of the past. They are happening right now, today, in the same forests, on the same trails, where thousands still hike every year. The Appalachian Trail winds for over 2,000 miles, cutting through forests, valleys, and mountains older than memory itself. For most, it is a place of beauty and adventure. But for some, it has become a place of dread. Because somewhere along those endless miles, hidden in the shadows of the trees, lurks something that isn't quite human and isn't quite animal. Something that hunters, campers, and hikers alike have come to fear. The Goatman. He is whispered about around campfires. warned about in hushed voices on local forums, sighted in the fog and darkness when no one else is supposed to be there. Some say he is a government experiment gone wrong. Others claim he is an ancient curse, a demon tied to the land. Whatever he is, one fact remains. The sightings have never stopped. In one chilling case, a backpacker posted that he and his friends set up camp near a remote ridge. At around 3 a.m., laughter echoed from the woods. Not quite human, but not entirely animal either. When they shined a flashlight, something huge darted between the trees. By dawn, they abandoned camp, too shaken to continue their hike. Even mainstream local news outlets occasionally mention disappearances on the Appalachian Trail. Most are written off as accidents, hikers who fell, got lost, or were caught by the elements. But among locals and in the shadowy corners of the internet, a different explanation is whispered. Goatman doesn't just watch. Sometimes he takes. Whether these stories are urban legend, internet creepypasta, or something more, they share the same unsettling pattern. An unseen presence that stalks, follows, and terrifies hikers in the Appalachian wilderness. And that brings us to the most chilling truth of all. These are not just stories of the past. They are happening right now, today, in the same forests, on the same trails, where thousands still hike every year. The Appalachian Trail winds for over 2,000 miles, cutting through forests, valleys, and mountains older than memory itself. For most, it is a place of beauty and adventure. But for some, it has become a place of dread. Because somewhere along those endless miles, hidden in the shadows of the trees, lurks something that isn't quite human and isn't quite animal. Something that hunters, campers, and hikers alike have come to fear. The Goatman. He is whispered about around campfires, warned about in hushed voices on local forums, sighted in the fog and darkness when no one else is supposed to be there. Some say he is a government experiment gone wrong. Others claim he is an ancient curse, a demon tied to the land. Whatever he is, one fact remains. The sightings have never stopped.